One, how are we doing this morning? Good, great, awesome. All those who are actually feeling really fresh and good, can I just see a raise of your left hand, everyone? A raise of your left hand. Now, people who are feeling better than them, raise your right hand. And all those who are really looking forward to this day, can I see both your hands up in the air? Both your hands up in the air. Let's start this morning by bringing some energy to the room and putting our hands together. Louder. Fantastic. That's more like it. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to day 2 of Prakriti 2026. Before we begin with our first plenary session of the day, we have a safety video that we would like to show you on the screen. So let's have a look at it.
Exhibitors and guests, welcome to the Bharat Electricity Summit 2026 at Yashobhumi Convention Center. Your safety and well-being are our highest priority. We request your cooperation in adhering to the following health, safety and security guidelines during the event. Please ensure that your event badge is worn and visible at all times within the venue. You follow all directional signages and instructions issued by event staff and security personnel. Emergency exits, aisles and walkways are kept pure at all times. Any unattended or suspicious item is reported immediately to the nearest security personnel. Cleanliness and hygiene are maintained by using designated waste disposal points. The venue is equipped with advanced surveillance systems, fire safety infrastructure, and trained emergency response teams for your safety. In case of any emergency, we request you to remain calm and follow these instructions. In case of fire, do not panic. Please avoid using elevators. Proceed to the nearest emergency exit by following the illuminated exit signage. Our staff will guide you to the designated assembly areas. In case of a medical emergency, please inform the nearest staff member or proceed to the medical assistant desk. On-site medical teams are available for immediate support. In case of a health or pandemic advisory, kindly adhere to all health protocols as announced, including hygiene practices and any additional guidelines issued during the event. In case of a security threat or attack, remain calm and follow instructions from security personnel. Move to a safe area as directed and avoid spreading panic or misinformation. We request your full cooperation with all safety procedures and security checks. Thank you for your attention. We wish you a safe and productive experience at Bharat Electricity Summit 2026.
All right, so in case of any emergency, you can use the exits which were just mentioned in the video, but that is only supposed to be used in case of emergency, not when you want to escape any session here. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, our day 1 began with some really fascinating insights which we gathered throughout the day from our expert speakers who have joined us here from all across the globe. We managed to gain some really interesting perspectives on developing global carbon markets, how to build the effective compliance frameworks. Not just that, in fact, our event was graced by the Honorable Union Minister for Power, Shri Manohar Lal ji, and Honorable Union Minister of State for Power, Shri Shripad Nayak ji. We also launched our Indian Carbon Market Portal yesterday as well. And today we are going to take it up a notch with some more exciting insights coming your way. Not just that, in fact, today this platform would be graced by none other than Shri Gaur Gopal Das ji in the afternoon. So make sure that everybody is there. I think the session is somewhere around the lunch, so make sure you all are present inside the room for that. On that note, let's begin with our first plenary session of the day that is going to be on balancing exports and emissions, navigating carbon border policies in developing countries. To chair and moderate this session, joining us up on stage is Mr. R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, Terry, and former Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Sir, can I request you to please join us here on the stage? Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him by putting our hands together. Well, joining us up on stage as one of our esteemed panelists is Mr. Axel Michaelova, Research Director, Perspectives Climate Research, and I think he would be joining us here very shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Rajiv Ralhan, partner PwC. Mr. Manish Dapkara, President-elect of the Carbon Markets Association of India, who would be joining us virtually. Mr. Ashish Ranjan, Associate Partner, Sustainability and Climate Consulting, Unicus. Welcome, welcome to you. So, sir, Mr. Axel would be here with us very shortly. And before Mr. Michaelova joins us here, maybe we can start with the first round of questions with our panelists. Okay. Yeah, the timer is right there for you. So just in case if you want to have a look.
1 hour or 1 minute?
It's 1 hour, sir, but I know nothing an hour and 1 minute. Welcome, welcome to you. Please have a seat at the dais.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. And thank you for your presence on a Sunday morning. We are really, we have had excellent discussions yesterday on the issues that touch upon the growth and the evolution of the carbon markets in various parts of the world, including our country. And today we'll be expanding on that subject a little bit. And here is Mr. Axel Michaelova. Very nice.
Apologies.
Most welcome, sir. You are here absolutely in time. So our panel is complete. So I was saying that we are going to expand and touch upon some of the newer areas of conversation relating to carbon markets, more particularly in the context of what is happening at the global level and what is happening at the domestic level. Now, in India, you are well aware, it has been discussed extensively. We have come up with a domestic carbon market mechanism, framework, and guidelines are in place now. In fact, the targets have kicked in. The units are expected to comply with that. So a formal compliance market is in place. Now, you are also aware that there are a number of such compliance markets functioning outside India. And one of them, the largest one, in fact, not the largest today, but amongst the largest, is the European ETS. And then the ETS has a new dimension now, that they are now covering imports as well. So there is a certain degree of a tax element involved in whatever goes into the European Union and their ETS. So the question which we wanted to discuss today in this panel is how does it affect the developing countries which have a compliance market, also a voluntary carbon market like in India. In India, we have both kinds of markets today. So how will it affect the people who are engaged in domestic production for the domestic compliance market and also exporting? The exports which go to European Union, so what kind of expectations do they have? What are the constraints which they will have to deal with? What is what are the barriers which they have to cross? And what are the policy issues which will perhaps facilitate their engagement with this export market and withstand the impacts which will fall on them because of the carbon taxes imposed in the foreign markets. So to help us understand these issues, we have an excellent panel. We have Mr. Axel Michaelova, who is a world-renowned expert on the carbon markets, and he has helped many countries, several countries in the developing world, come up with their own carbon instruments. So he is the best expert that we can have, who has access to the information and also a very large perspective. In fact, incidentally, he runs the organization called Perspective. So you will have, you will hear from him. Mr. Ashish Ranjan, who represents Unicus. They're also, they're leader in the field of sustainability, and he brings almost 16 to 20 years of experience in this. We have Mr. Rajiv Ralhan, who is next to me, and he's a partner of the PwC, and again, he has a very rich experience in helping the corporate world come up with sustainability solutions and more so about the carbon markets. The fourth and the last but not the least panelist will join us virtually, Mr. Manish Dabkara. You are all aware of him, that he is the president of the CMAI, Carbon Market Association of India, and also the CMD of EKI Energy Services, who operate in the carbon markets and deal with the credits. So here we are, and I'll like to begin with Mr. Michelova, if you permit, sir. You have an international exposure to international carbon market, and you have helped several countries design their instruments. My question to you would be, I mean, considering this, the evolution which you have seen globally, and also you have looked at the developments in India. So, in your view, looking at India and the domestic carbon market in India, and the nature of the CBAM, which is going to operate for some of the export-oriented industries in India, what are the mechanisms which you think will enable the industries in India to invest in low-carbon technologies and meet the CBAM challenge? Second question, which is related a little bit, is related to this MRV, with those units which will be requested to comply with the CBAM requirements, what kind of MRV framework they can come up with. And so before I request you to speak, since we have about 53 minutes now, and we have 4 panelists, what the format which I would like them to follow is that they can speak for about 3 to 4, maybe a little more than 4, depending on what they want to touch upon. You can speak initially for 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll go for the second round of questions, if time permitting. Then finally we'll open it to the audience for their questions, if any. So over to you, sir. And you are not bound by my questions. You are free to interpret them and come up with your own views about this. And you're most welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Rashmi. I'm really happy to be at the second edition of PRAKRITI. I see it is now in a grandiose new venue. I actually had to rush because I thought it was in the old venue, but I'm here on time. Thank you very much. So I think India, of course, is now very well placed with regard to the use of carbon markets, both domestically and internationally, because you have now set up the framework for your trading scheme, and it's a trading scheme which is based on intensity. So of course it is different from other trading schemes that we have in the world that are based on absolute emissions, but of course for a rapidly growing economy like the Indian one, an intensity-based scheme makes a lot of sense because it can accommodate growing sectors. So I think you've made the right choice as a starting point, and of course you also have set the groundwork for domestic offsetting with methodologies being published and being available. And of course I'm interested to hear how the Carbon Market Association of India sees the development of the domestic offset market. And of course, you are a country that has put a lot of emphasis recently on making the right decisions on Article 6 And the sectors that are eligible in India under Article 6 are really trailblazers, because you don't make the mistakes that many African countries are doing to sell off the easy, low-hanging fruit, maybe even non-additional things. But the sectors you've chosen for Article 6 are really the high-tech, the costly sectors where actually good revenues are needed to mobilize the reductions. So I think you have the building blocks in place, but now of course the question comes how to ensure that these building blocks lead to action on the ground. And again, of course, India has a lot of experience with carbon markets. Under Kyoto Protocol, India was the #2 country globally in the Clean Development Mechanism, and I think has an unparalleled ecosystem of carbon market service providers. So you can build on very strong foundations. And what I would think, of course, is now critical to ensure that these you'll get an upscaling of the mitigation mobilized by the system. And there, of course, you have some precedent that gives lessons that you should really take into account. For example, the PAT scheme, the trading for the energy-intensive sectors. You had a beautiful system set up, but then the incentive and the enforcement actually was not really there. That led to a low utilization of the system. So I think it is important to draw lessons from the low liquidity, low degree of action in the PET scheme, and not repeat the same mistakes now for the CCTS. Also now to ensure that the right choices are being made when companies and other entities decide for which market to go. Should they go for Article 6? Should they go for the domestic offset scheme? What will be the pricing? What will be the demand? And of course, as you rightly said, the European CBAM lurking in the background. And the question is, how will the domestic carbon pricing that India is now setting up be taken into account? And I think there the diplomacy of the Indian government is critical, because you need to convince the European Union that your different components of the carbon market in India are all valid to be taken into account under CBAM. I know that there has been a very narrow interpretation of the European Union initially, saying that only the specific transparent carbon pricing would be taken into account, and for example that a 1-to-1 ton by ton recognition of mitigation would not be done. But the European Union now actually is taking second thoughts, and you see now European Union for 15 years was not wanting to import international carbon credits. Now this has changed. Last autumn, the EU institutions decided that for the 2040 target, they will import the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes under Article 6. And then, of course, it must be natural that also such internationally transferred mitigation outcomes are recognized under the CBAM, ton by ton. So I think the diplomatic effort that India should now really push with the EU, and of course I note that the EU has signed important treaties with India very recently, and that this gives a very good basis for continuation of the discussion. But the target of the Indian negotiation should be to have a 1-to-1 ton by ton recognition of what you are doing under Article 6. And then if you manage to have the domestic offset scheme with the same high quality design as the Article 6 system, then also to get a recognition of the domestic offset. And it's clear that given the current geopolitical situation, the European Union is willing to listen, and I think this could be a really interesting way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mishalova. Of course, I had a small supplementary question there. Since you have spoken about a ton-to-ton equivalence, do you think the current compliance market evolving in India addressed, is it adequate enough to address this question?
That's a very good question that I cannot answer at this point in time because, of course, the EU has an absolute tonnage cap. And now, of course, then the question comes in, how is the intensity-based system, how can it be made equivalent? I think there could be opportunities to make it equivalent, but of course that requires good methodological discussions. We know that for some sectors the targets are ambitious, for other sectors they are maybe a bit less ambitious, and I think this could be a good discussion diplomatically to look into, is the Indian cap, the intensity-based cap, sufficiently equivalent to be fully taken into account?
Okay, so this is still work in progress. Let me go to Mr. Rajiv Rallan now. Sir, you have very large experience in working with corporate entities on the sustainability frameworks. And you have seen the evolution of the domestic carbon market as a policy tool for decarbonization and also meeting our NDC targets. So, but this trade question which is now coming up, and Axel talked about this lurking in the background. So while we are engaged in a domestic evolution as far as carbon market is concerned, do you think it's the kind of initiatives that India has taken, they are adequate policy tools? Or do you think as a corporate person engaged with the corporate sector, would you advise something more than this or less than this or something additional? What is it that is required to meet this challenge, the trade challenge that is coming up, and also meet the requirements of the compliance market in India?
Thank you, sir. Good morning all. I think this whole idea of discussions around climate policy, trade, CBAM, which we are discussing, it is as disruptive as we see. We invited people on Sunday, so they are coming here listening to us. So my view here is that there are three parts into this. That one is the policy actions taken by individual countries. So a lot of good work has happened in Europe, a lot of good work happening in India. The important part here is that do we see climate policy as a catalyst for this? Because trade remains one of the key pillars of our discussions between these two countries. So one part of this is, because we've been part of a lot of policy development also, so I can maybe talk from both the sides. Developing policies is one key aspect which we've been discussing, but then how do we harmonize two policy instruments which can actually help us achieve the larger agenda? Because the way when we interact with corporates also, the way it is seen here is that this CBAM, I see mixed debate around CBAM. Is it a policy driver which is actually helping largely on avoiding the carbon leakage? That's one. But the second part here is that people sometimes also view this as a trade deterrent. So which means that although we are in the process of defining policies, we are in the process of aligning standards, do we have an ecosystem or institutional framework in place to make it happen? So what I mean here is that, of course, policy is there. How do we maintain this whole idea of equity balance, which means the whole debate around developing versus developed world. We've been debating a lot for years that maybe our emissions in comparison to the developed world is less. But how do we balance it out? I think that's one point which is still debated. whatever benefits which are happening through this whole CBAM discussions, the larger agenda here is that we want to promote decarbonization across the globe. So do we see that cheap climate finance is available to address that? Because we've been debating that all these technologies, carbon capture, of course, government has announced initiatives, and there are many other actions which are available to decarbonization these industries. But do we have finance available with us which can help our industries to achieve their climate commitment? That's one. So which means the corporates are looking at their share of money to help these things available. And the third part is that, do we have systems in place? So I'm referring here to the implementation framework. Do we have a good set of MRV systems in our countries, that what kind of data needs to be reported, how it needs to be reported, because there are a lot of penalty aspects as well. So my feel here is that on one side, the ambition is right, where we talk about CBAM or other set of instruments, but some work around the climate finance, number one, and setting the right set of institutional frameworks is critical if we have to make it successful.
Thank you, Mr. Arun. So you have talked of two things. One is the support in terms of cheap or affordable finance, which is required for the units which are wanting to invest in low carbon technologies to meet the domestic goals as well as the foreign challenge, the trade challenge. And second is the institutional framework. You talked about MRV, but I think it's a little more, is a bigger question. But granting that these two are going to happen, or perhaps will be addressed in the years to come, you also refer to the other question of equity between the developed and the developing countries' efforts. And that directly addresses Mr. Axel's question. He talked of equivalence between 1 ton in developed countries and 1 ton in developing countries. But you are perhaps arguing for a slightly different regime. A 1 ton effort in developing countries is worth more than 1 ton in a developed country. So will that ratio be maintained 1-to-1 basis, or will be 1:1.5, or whatever is the? Because I was when I was looking at listening to some of the conversations around this issue, I think this effort, the kind of efforts that are made by different countries, there is need of addressing that level of efforts in this entire business of relationship between the carbon markets domestic and the carbon markets at the global level. So I'll come back to this question a little later, but do you think, would you like to expand a little bit more on the institutional framework which you are suggesting?
So what I meant by institutional framework here is it not specific or restricting myself to the data issue. It's not about that. So data is one part of it. How do we, MRVs? I think it is more about that, how do we build the larger capacity? So what I meant by the larger capacity is that we need technologies, number one. We need sufficient technical expertise, and of course financing is part of that. And then I'm referring to this whole data framework. So what I'm simply saying here is that there are 2 levers or 3 levers to achieve these targets. One is the low-hanging fruits. We don't need capacity for that. Maybe that can be done through policy or other incentives and all that. But when we talk about innovative set of technologies, we talk about CCUS, we talk about, of course, a lot of work is happening around hydrogen, and we see many of the PLI schemes happening. Those are the areas maybe which require larger intervention, so that a combination of low-hanging plus innovative options can help us achieve these larger climate goals.
Right, very good. So apart from data collection, you also need certain capacity for high-tech areas. Good. Mr. Ashish Ranjan, let me come to you. Again, like Mr. Allen, you are also engaged with the corporate world and you have advised many of them. Let me come back to you with that direct question on the MRV thing, because both of them have touched upon this. Now we have a domestic compliance market. We are, some of the units are expected to also report this to the European Union because there is a CBAM requirement, those which are engaged in exports. But we also have a domestic compliance system where we are expected to report, and there is a guideline for that. So do you think this is enough? Does it, these two systems, do they match, or something more is required here? I'll come back to this question for Mr. Excel also, but what is your take on this?
Thank you, sir, and good morning, everyone. I think this is a very pertinent question. I would probably break up my response into a three-part answer, because the question of external or third-party validation of emissions data is very, very critical to this, to the whole MRV system. Traditionally, this has been seen as more of a compliance cost. I think people need to transition from that understanding to, considering it as a market credential instead of a compliance cost. In my view, third-party verification of emissions data is kind of the structural backbone of a system like CBAM because it determines the credibility of the system. CBAM is only as credible as the emissions data that underpins it because the levy is basically calculated or calibrated based on the actual embedded emissions data. So it presents kind of a fundamental tension in my view. The non-EU producer who is standing to gain from underrepresenting their emissions data is also the source of that data. So any gap in reliability would undermine the whole environmental objective of the mechanism. Even the CBAM design basically reflects that. In the initial transitional phase, reporting data, self-reporting data based on default factors was allowed. Now that door with the implementation from 1st January is going to get closed. Third-party verification of emissions data is going to be mandatory. The verifiers who provide that verification have to be accredited as per the EU national accreditation bodies. To the extent that in the first year of reporting, even in-person facility inspection is mandatory. From second year onwards, maybe based on a risk-based approach that can be, done on a remote basis, but in the first year, it's going to be physical inspection. And the quality of data will really be important there. And for the verifiers, it's not just about the emissions data. They would be also focusing on the monitoring mechanism, the system boundaries that have been selected for reporting the data. Also, what kind of emission sources are they considering, etc. All of that will become really instrumental. There is a materiality threshold that has been set at 5%. So any observation which leads the verifier to believe that there's a more than 5% variance in the data would mean that the verification process has failed. And in both cases, whether the verification process fails or there's a delay in the verification process beyond the declaration deadline, would mean that the default factors would apply. And as we all know, those default factors have been deliberately set high, and it would lead to penalties for the exporters. So given all of that in mind, I think it's very important to understand what's the underlying basic framework that is going to apply in the case of external verification as well as the emission calculation methodology. As of now, what has emerged is the EU ETS was based on the monitoring and reporting regulation framework, and the same is expected to apply, which means that the preparer of the data will have to base their emission calculations on actual facility level and meter-based data. Now, typically corporates have been, for their corporate sustainability reporting practices, been using sources such as life cycle assessments, environmental product disclosures, etc., which are average-based, that will no longer satisfy the requirements of the CBAM. So this also presents a significant challenge, specifically for exporters in the MSME category, where traditionally they have not been implementing strong monitoring and reporting mechanisms. So this means there could be issues such as uncalibrated meters leading to unreliable emission information. There could be lack of data management systems that they have implemented. There could be, even challenges in terms of sources of data. So all of that presents a very significant operational and financial challenge for MSMEs in the developing sector, because this will need a lot of capacity building as well as investment. So to conclude it, I would say that the external verification of emissions data it's not peripheral to the CBAM. It's actually central to its integrity, of the whole mechanism itself. And for MSMEs and exporters in the developing world, it presents an operational and financial challenge, but at the same time, it also presents a strategic opportunity. Companies that will implement MRV systems early enough and in a robust manner will stand to gain from a competitiveness perspective, and also be able to, be ready for any future scope expansions or even for the Indian carbon markets.
Thank you, Ashish. This issue of third-party verification of the emission reductions in India by the units which are engaged in exports. Now, this is a tough call which you have just mentioned, because all of this involves a great degree of cost. The question is, since you are engaged with the corporate units, what is their feedback? I mean, what you are telling me is the requirement of EU reporting and regulation. That is, of course, known to us, that if we have to engage in exports to them, we have to comply with those reporting regulations. But what is the feedback which is coming from the corporate sector of India? How will they comply with this? And how will they meet these additional costs? Or is there something which we can do to moderate this cost?
So in our interactions, especially with the large companies, I think they have a sufficient level of preparedness. But when it comes to the medium and small companies, that's where the challenge really intensifies. Another key challenge to solve for here is the lack of the, accreditation infrastructure. The EU has just launched that system. It's very new. And the time left with us for meeting that September 27 deadline is not a lot. So very rapid deployment of capacity building needs to happen. Even the verification bodies need to be identified on time, and they need to obtain that accreditation from the NABs in EU. And from the important stakeholders like government's perspective, investing in this capacity building is definitely key. Some of the, international organizations, institutions could also help in that effort. The role of World Bank or UNFCCC is going to be really critical in that, in my view.
Thank you. With this, let me go to the fourth speaker of the day, and perhaps he'll be able to add to the discussion here and answer some of the questions, or maybe bring some additional inputs to this issue which we are discussing. Mr. Manish Dabkara, if he is available, can he join us? Okay. Can somebody put us in touch with him virtually?
Hello?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Can you hear me and also see me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Oh, of course, I can't see you. Okay. I can see you there. Manish, welcome. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, sir.
You know, you must have been listening to these three speakers so far.
Yes.
And the questions which they were wanting to answer, they have been answering. So the question which I had for you was almost similar. The question is that of the policy tools in India, the financing for low carbon investments, and the reporting, with the MRV mechanism in place in India. And you are engaged with this work in the voluntary carbon market for a long period. So what do you think is going to happen? Particularly those units which are not just engaged in the voluntary carbon market, but also are going to be subjected to the compliance market in India. So in your view, what is the scenario going to look like? Is it going to be a difficult scenario, or do you think we will be able to tide over this, given this challenge of the CBAM?
Yes, sir. As we know, the voluntary carbon markets, either the recently started offset mechanism or VCS, gold standard, other various different standards, so they are quite different as compared to the compliances or the compliance markets, which includes CCTS or CBAM. So both are totally different as of now. India is, for last 10 years specifically, India is having, it was having, or the Indian corporates were, they were having a very good experience in reference to generation of carbon credits and selling into the international voluntary carbon markets. But the CCTS or the compliance market is going to be altogether a different game for them. And again, it's a very good opportunity because in case of voluntary carbon markets, we measure emissions on the project basis, while in case of CBAM or in case of CCTS, compliance carbon markets, it's a totally different altogether. Calculations would be there. That means that it would be there at the company level. So the transition wherein the companies who are already being into the compliance initially to start with CBAM, then slowly there are also few companies definitely will do overlap with the CCTS, but the companies who are not there either into the CBAM or CCTS, initially they should start to know more about the voluntary carbon markets, have a good number of projects, generate credits from them, from those projects, specifically on the project basis, and then slowly migrate or get into the compliance with whatever the requirements are there under the CBAM or CCTS, so that they will remain future ready.
The supplementary question which I would have is, the units which are going to participate in the compliance market now, do you think it will impact on the trading in the voluntary carbon market or availability of the units in the voluntary carbon market?
Sir, as of now, and we already know the voluntary carbon market is oversupplied. Almost more than 1 billion credits are there, which are already exist, coming from various different programs like VCS Gold Standard. And the annual consumption or the annual cancellations or the retirements used to vary in between 120 million to 200 million. So already the market is 5 times oversupplied, and I do not think while having CBAM or CCTS or other different mechanisms in place, there would be any impact having a large inventory which is also there into the pipeline. So for next 5 years, if you see, there would be no impact, but slowly and slowly, as we already know, once the market will get matured to meet the targets for CCTS or CBAM or net zero emission goals, definitely the voluntary market will shrink. So, but it will take more than 20 years to see this scenario.
Okay. So it will shrink, but it will also perhaps help in standardization and a little more transparency in the voluntary market. Do you think that is a good, it's something which you are prepared, our institutional system in India is prepared for that, or some additional measures are required?
So yes, definitely, this is the need of the hour, having transparency, having a good additionality tools, good number of projects which do and which should get the carbon finance in the form and format of the voluntary or compliance carbon markets or the selling of those credits. So definitely, this is a need of the hour as we refer to the various stakeholders, not only in India but across the globe. All these stringent measures definitely should be imposed over the voluntary carbon market. And as as the compliance markets will grow, the voluntary market will also try to follow whatever the stringent or strict regulations that will come up either through CCTS or CBAM or Article 6. So already the standards like gold standard and other different standards, already they are now trying to comply with the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement carbon markets or the regulations, and so the other standards will follow. Further, we also know if the MCU, which is again going to become a big competitor for the existing voluntary carbon standards as of now. That means if you will not get the host country approval letter under PACM, Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, you would be eligible to earn for the MCUs. And again, those MCUs, I do personally think would have higher quality or higher standards as compared to the other various different voluntary carbon market standards which do exist as of now across the globe. So definitely, sir, the situation will improve very soon.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you for your inputs. I'll come back to you in the second round if there are any questions which relate to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Michalova, let me begin with the second round with you, because there are a number of questions which have come up in my mind and also based on the inputs given by the other 2 or 3 panelists here. The question which arose was, sorry, where did I keep this? This third-party verification, it's here. This question of third-party verification, it's going to impose a cost on Indian units which are going to participate in CBAM. So there is obviously, we need to find a solution to this problem. Because as you know very well that in the CCTS there will be certain notified units. But there are a large number of units which are a part of the supply chain, which are outside this. And all of them actually have to comply with this or prepare themselves for this kind of exercise in some manner. So do you think this third-party verification is a good way to go about it, or we need to maybe find a more comprehensive, more affordable solution to this problem? And then I have some suggestions myself, but I'll listen to you first before I come back.
Yes, thank you. I actually agree 100% with Ashish that it's critical. It's a backbone of the trust in the whole greenhouse gas mitigation policy system to have independent verification. Now the question is how to bring down transaction costs. And I think Ashish has nicely hinted to a solution. So you have default parameters that are conservative. And so the entities that do not want to have high transaction costs can have recourse to these default parameters. But of course, that means that the volume of mitigation units they will generate is less. But of course, then every entity needs to see what is the trade-off between having full monitoring according to the rules that are generally accepted, or whether there is recourse to the defaults. And of course, a programmatic approach can also be very helpful. So if there are SME clusters that you would have a coordinating managing entity like in the programs of activities under the CDM that would organize the verification for the entire cluster, and there would be sampling, significant sampling. We now have the sampling rules being developed for the Article 6.4, the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. And of course, if you have a program that covers 1,000 units, and then you sample probably 30 or 40, then the transaction costs go down significantly. So I think that in the last 30 years of carbon markets, we've learned to deal with the transaction costs, and that we can have a good compromise between the full trust in the system and the transaction cost for the specific units.
Thank you. The other question also which I had, and which arises from the equity question which Mr. Ralhan raised. Do you think there is any appetite in the European Union to consider this equivalence to be a little more flexible in terms of efforts, the degree of technology, finance, and that kind of unevenness in our efforts? Do you think something can be done to make it a little more flexible?
Well, I think one could use the existing partnerships that India has with the EU, with Germany, to jointly work on pragmatic solutions that, on the one hand, give a very clear incentive for mitigation, that do not have loopholes. Of course, we saw under CDM, especially in the very first gold rush years, that there was a number of activities that actually didn't pass the test. And when I listened to Manish, I would say also in the voluntary carbon market, we had quite a lot of stuff that was shaky or even shady. And we've seen that entire segments of the voluntary carbon market essentially broke down. The credits are no longer sellable or sell at a few dollar cents per credit. So one needs, of course, to be careful not to lose trust, because we've lost trust already in the CDM, we've lost trust in big segments in the voluntary market, and we cannot afford to lose trust, for example, in the Article 6 mechanisms, because 3 times having lost trust, then I would fear that the international policymakers are not wanting to attempt another a 4th time.
Yeah. No, obviously, the flexibility without integrity will not fly, but we have to ensure that standards are adhered to. Thank you very much. Mr. Allen, can I come back to you? We have, I think we will have about 10 minutes to be for the audience. Briefly, just one more question to you. You know, in India, you know, we have this domestic market now, and we had this trade arrangement with the European Union, which has been signed. Unfortunately, we didn't find a resolution to the problem. But do you think something is possible now, even now, coming, considering your expertise and your feedback from the industry?
So thank you very much. Just for your information that for last 5 years, so there's a clean energy climate partnership between Europe and India. Okay. So for CCP1 and CCP2, fortunately, as a PwC, we were supporting Europe, and we were closely working with European authorities as well as Indian government. And as part of CCP3 in FTA, Europe has committed, I think, 500 million euros only for climate finance for this. See, my view here is that I think you touched upon 2 to 3 very critical parts. One part when Ashish talked about the third-party verifiers. I think because there's a provision of penalty as well. So which means, why do we need third-party verifiers? Of course, the transaction cost is high. We need to build this whole issue of trust and transparency. So that's one critical part when we are talking about any of the trade, or when we are talking about any of the discussions between different players. That's one. Second thing, you very importantly talked about, we are only talking about large steel players or small steel players, but you touched upon this whole idea of supply chain. What is our readiness maybe to prepare those kind of smaller players who are contributing to these large supply chains? I think that should be the next set of action which as a country we need to consider. So that's the second part of it. And the third part here is that again related to which you asked about this whole equity issue, that how do we make it happen. My understanding here is that maybe some kind of aligned efforts around recognizing the benefits or opportunities versus challenges, and how two countries or two economies can support each other, can help fill this. Again, I'm coming back to this whole idea of climate finance. Because simply saying that we need to go for innovative solutions will not help. So we need to bring this whole idea of economics with climate. Simply talking about climate will not help as long as we don't bring this whole idea of economics into this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. With this last thought which you referred to, this the question of the MSMEs and this whole exercise, how does it impact on them, both in terms of compliance, domestic market as well as the CBAM. So, Ashish, what is your solution for that? How do you see the future evolving here? Do you have any suggestions for this purpose?
So I think the government and the multilateral bodies have a huge role to play there. As there should be like an immediate investment in MRV frameworks, which kind of play on the interoperability of the different mechanisms. So we have the CCTS, we have the CBAM, there could be other requirements as well, but that MRV framework should be robust enough to cover the various requirements and make sure that it is completely interoperable. Domestic carbon pricing frameworks also need to be designed. We already have something coming up in the form of CCTS, but making that really recognizable in other geographies is also critical. So that is another key step forward in my view. And lastly, the capacity building angle cannot be ignored at all. I think that is going to be really key in terms of making sure the readiness is there. We don't have a lot of time in terms of the first declaration deadline coming in September 27. It's hardly a year and a half. And at the moment, even the pool of verifiers is not available to the extent that is required. So making sure that capacity building, both on the verifier side as well as on the reporter side, needs to be done very, very quickly and rapidly.
Thank you, Ashish, very much. With this, we have come to the end of the conversation strictly with the panelists, but it's now open house, and I invite questions from the audience. I'll request you to kindly identify yourself and mention the panelists for which the question is addressed, and kindly keep the question very brief because we don't have much time. I see about 4 or 5 hands. So first one is here.
Maybe I can ask. One thing we have noticed, myself Vaibhav Gupta, I am director with Unicus Consultant. it's an open question on the MRV part. Given that CBAM, it also allows adjustment of domestic tax that each and every developing country, like whosoever has developed CCTS or a like system, to adjust into that final liability calculation. My question is that CBAM operates at a product level, whereas some of the domestic markets, they are operating at a plant level or a process level. So how MRV architectures are also adjusting for that, for this mismatch? Are we also working on this allocation methodology so that we have a single source of verification system?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? Yeah, there is one at the back.
Hi, my name is Navneet. I am from Semcorp. So I have a question regarding the pricing around the CBAM. Because
Sorry?
in the case of CBAM...
Please come again.
I have a question regarding the price label around CBAM. In case of CBAM, the price references are mostly drawn from the EU ETS. So in around the EU ETS, the current price label are around 70 euro per ton of carbon. But in case of developing countries like India, the cost of carbon, the price of carbon is far, far lower. So do you think in near future there will be any convergence between the prices of EU ETS and the domestic carbon trading schemes? And if not, does it mean through CBAM EU will be imposing its domestic climate policy on rest of the world?
All right. Okay. No, I think Mr. Axel did mention that there is the other possibility is ton-to-ton equivalence, not just price equivalence, but I would request him to address this question. Axel, for you, would you like to answer this? And this question of the product versus plant level.
Yes, thank you. Let's first cover now the question of the pricing. So, of course, the ton per ton equivalence is critical to prevent that Indian carbon price needs to reach the 60-70 euro per ton that you mentioned, because it's clear that Indian industry would not be able to bear a price of 60-70 in a very short future. One should, of course, also note that the CBAM only kicks in over the next 8 years. So the critical period will be from 2029 onwards if the schedule is kept like it currently stands. So there is still some time to prepare and to have this conversation with the EU with regard to the ton per ton equivalence. On the MRV with regard to activity-based and product-based. This, of course, is a problem because product-based accounting is much more complicated than activity-based accounting. We have 30 years of experience with activity-based accounting under international carbon markets, and I think the methodological basis is now very solid, but product-based accounting is still a mess. So I would hope that, again, the EU is pragmatic and, of course, looks into approaches that simplify and prevent that we have now 100 layers of disaggregation in the product chain, because that definitely would be prohibitive in terms of monitoring costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there are two hands here, and there was one at the back. The gentleman here. Please take the mic there. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Please. Please speak.
Hello. First, I would like to wish thank you to all the panel for a beautiful session. I'm Abhishek. I'm doing my master's in energy. I'm also engaging with EY. So it was a beautiful discussion, but I also wanted to bring in perhaps the angle of aviation into picture, because recently the Technical Advisory Board released applications for countries to sort of apply for CORSIA eligible emission units. The question was simple. It's just that CORSIA as of right now has stated that from 2027, international flights would be allowed to sort of participate in the mitigation measures. And certain countries were omitted for it. For example, least developing countries would be omitted from it, or smaller landlocked countries would be omitted from it. But for example, in Africa, one of the least developing countries would be Guyana, as well as a few others, which do have cooperative approaches with Japan, for example. So even though they are exempted or allowed to be exempted, they can participate in terms of, I would say, credits. So how can countries be better aligned, I would say, from aviation perspective, now that India is having its CCTS, how can we be better aligned so that we are able to participate in it? Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it very clearly. You said, how could countries align themselves better with what?
I would say to participate in CORSA eligible emissions unit.
Anybody who would like to answer? Yes, sir.
Well, now, of course, we have already the first types of credits that are eligible for CORSIA. This is the so-called R3s, avoided deforestation, and certain cook stove methodologies, and 32 million credits eligible under CORSIA have been issued to date. We have seen a significant reduction of the credit price in the past 3 months. They fell from about $20 per credit to now about $13 per credit. So one can see that the airline demand currently is not sufficient to sustain a high price. But the system is operational, and many airlines were fearing that there would not be credits available, but they are available, and the recent price decline shows that apparently the offer of credits is currently sufficient. And of course, if one now looks at the effects of the Gulf War that reduces airline traffic globally significantly, there are now even fears of a glut of such credits.
Okay. Yes, sir.
My name is Sundar Raju. I am from Sundar Institute of Sustainability. Sir, this MRV mechanism, monitoring, verification and all, technology will help in future better reporting and better carbon trading and certifying mechanisms and all. How technology will help? My question is to Axel, sir. Axel.
Oh, all the questions are going to him.
Well, I
would
think
request some other
would be somebody who could answer.
I think one of you should answer this.
So yeah, again, a very pertinent question in the current scenario. I'm happy to share that technology is actually already helping in that process. Now, there's always that cost component linked to it. Like, if you implement at scale, the cost economics go down. So obviously, once this whole technology-based verification system achieves that level of scale, the cost will also be something that MSMEs could bear. At the moment, something like, say, implementing AI in direct process level or equipment level energy performance or emission intensity is a little cost prohibitive, to be honest. But we hope that in due time that will become or achieve that scale so that it becomes economically viable to implement for everyone.
Yeah, just one thing on this. So it's not simply about MRV. If you look for your future, digitization will help you improve your processes also. Okay? So process efficiency is the first pillar, which will save you cost. And ultimately, you are getting the data for your MRVs.
Okay. There was one last question at the back. I'm sorry, sir. There is a gentleman at the back. Yes. And maybe this will be the last one.
Check. Oh, thanks. Hugh Slater from Client Earth. So my question is about, there's been financial assistance announced from Europe to India, which at least in the discourse around decarbonization, at least in the discourse is around helping to sort of mitigate the impact of CBAM. But of course, Europe has other major trading partners that also have concerns with CBAM. Obviously, the US is very transactional these days, and China has initiated consultations at the WTO. So I'm wondering if there's any insights into how Europe is thinking about managing the importance of sort of pragmatic engagement with its big trading partners and finding ways to make CBAM work in practice, while also being seen as sort of being fair to all of its major trading partners and not getting into a sort of one against the other kind of situation. Any of the panelists really, but apologies if it goes to Axel, but perhaps the others also have thoughts.
Financial. What is Europe's plan for providing financial assistance?
Well, Of course, finance currently is under huge pressure. You may have seen the announcement of the UK that UK will slash its climate finance by 14%. It just came 2 days ago. And Switzerland, Germany will follow. So it is an open flank and a gaping hole in the international system. You cannot, unfortunately, expect anybody from government to fill this hole, and this is why the international carbon market becomes even more important, because it then remains the key pillar for climate change mitigation action in emerging economies and developing countries.
Thank you. I think with this we have come to the end of this session. Allow me to thank all the panelists, including the one on the screen. And then all of you also for your patience on a Sunday morning and coming here to listen to a wonderful panel with rich experience. Actually, you will find very few people with this kind of deep experience in the carbon markets who can give you inputs and advice on how the market will evolve into future. So join me in giving them a big round of applause. And I don't have to summarize it. I think, although this was the task given to me by the organizers, but the signals are clear. We began by when Axel mentioned that there is a positive development in India as far as the carbon market is concerned. But of course, we have to address a number of issues. And the biggest question is that of finding equivalence between the CBAM expectations and domestic market expectations. And the second, of course, is the capacity building around the institutions, the high technology areas, which we need to do to ensure that the carbon market evolves and doesn't get static. And finally, the question of finance, which is critical. And we also have to, they refer to the issue of partnership between Europe and India, which can perhaps partially help us overcome this problem. So thank you very much once again, and thanks to the panelists. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for illuminating all of us with your valued perspectives. May I now request Mr. Pankaj Kalyani to please join us here on the stage and kindly felicitate all our esteemed panelists. Starting with our chair and moderator, Mr. R.R. Rashmi. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the man who took the responsibility of driving this whole conversation forward. Thank you so much, sir, for asking all the amazing questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mr. Rajiv Ralhan, partner PwC. Mr. Ashish Ranjan, associate partner, sustainability and climate consulting, Unicus. And Mr. Axel Michaelova, research director, Perspectives Climate Research. And although Mr. Manish Dabkara joined us virtually, let's have a big round of applause for him as well. Come on, just in case if he's able to hear us. And can I request you all to please stay back on the stage for one quick photo opportunity? Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, let's keep it rolling. Come on, one more time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much again. So ladies and gentlemen, it's a Sunday morning. How many of us are actually getting texts from our family members that where are you on Sunday? It was supposed to be our day. We were perhaps supposed to go out for some good lunch, brunch, maybe a good family outing. Is anyone getting those texts? One. Okay. Two. Three. I hope that you will be able to make up for it maybe in the near future. But yes, a lot of knowledge is going to be trickled down further with our coming sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving towards our next plenary session in this hall. That is on strengthening host country readiness for Paris-aligned carbon pricing. Ladies and gentlemen, this thematic track explores how host countries can strengthen their institutional, technical, and policy capacities for implementing Article 6 carbon markets. The discussion will also highlight the role of domestic and international carbon pricing instruments in mobilizing finance for development and climate priorities while safeguarding environmental integrity. This session will emphasize national readiness through targeted capacity, building in governance frameworks, strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, and decision-making tools required to participate effectively in high-integrity carbon markets. It will also highlight practical challenges and lessons learned in aligning national climate strategies with Article 6 and explore opportunities for international cooperation, knowledge sharing, and scalable approaches to support broader adoption of Paris-aligned carbon markets. Before I invite our esteemed panelists on the stage, I would just like to quickly make sure that I hope you all have been posting online on social media platforms and using the hashtag #Prakriti 2026, because that we are also showcasing outside in our social media wall. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, for this plenary session, please join me in welcoming on stage our wonderful chair and moderator for this session, Ms. Namita Prasad, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Welcome to you, ma'am, and welcome to the second edition. It was so wonderful to have you at our first edition as well, and you're looking absolutely wonderful this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelist on the stage, Mr. Stefan Ilkes, Policy Officer, Climate, EU Delegation to India. Mr. Abhishek Kaushik, Senior Advisor, Climate and Carbon Markets, UNEP. Abhishek Kaushik is here? He's coming? Okay. Mr. Uma Maheshwaran Krishnan, Article 6 and Carbon Pricing Regional Expert at UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for the MENA and South Asia. Mr. Brij Mohan, Senior Climate Change Officer, Asian Development Bank. Mr. Pedro Barata, Associate Vice President, Environmental Defense Fund. Welcome to you all.
Yes. Rich, I think you're there. Yeah, Mr. Barata, you're here.
We have one chair.
Oh, okay. Can I take this out? So a warm good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us on a Sunday morning. I'm Namita Prasad, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, and I will chair and moderate the session on strengthening host country readiness for Paris-aligned carbon pricing. So as all the distinguished delegates know, carbon markets are now transitioning from concept to implementation under the Paris Agreement. And the focus is increasingly shifting towards readiness of host countries to engage effectively in these mechanisms. In particular, the Article 6 introduces new opportunities for international cooperation, enabling countries to mobilize climate finance, enhance mitigation ambition, and pursue cost-effective emission reductions. But, however, participation in Paris-aligned carbon markets is not automatic. It requires a robust institutional, technical, and policy capacities. Governments must establish clear governance frameworks, transparent authorization processes, and credible accounting systems, while ensuring alignment with national climate priorities, including their NDCs and their long-term strategies. At the same time, the evolving carbon market landscape is raising complex policy and operational questions. These include how to operationalize corresponding adjustments, how to integrate international market participation with domestic carbon pricing instruments, and how to ensure that carbon market activities deliver high environmental integrity without compromising on the development priorities. So this session is situated at the intersection of these challenges as well as opportunities. It will explore how host countries can strengthen their readiness through targeted capacity building, improved institutional coordination, and the development of decision-making tools and governance systems required for effective participation in international carbon markets. This discussion would also highlight the role of both domestic and international carbon pricing instruments in mobilizing finance for climate and development objectives, while examining the practical experiences from countries and institutions who are already engaged in Article 6 implementation. By drawing emerging lessons and best practices, the session aims to provide insights on how countries can design robust, transparent, and scalable frameworks for engaging in Paris-aligned carbon markets, and how international cooperation and knowledge sharing can support broader adoption of high-integrity market approaches. So this is the context in which the discussion will take place today. And now let me introduce to you our panelists. First, we have Mr. Abhishek Kaushik. Abhishek has over 15 years' experience in climate change mitigation, carbon markets, international climate agreements, and negotiations. He's currently associated with the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, where he works on providing capacity building and technical assistance to developing countries on the strategic use of Article 6 carbon markets to ensure alignment with NDCs, SDGs, and Paris goals. We are also joined by Mr. Pedro Martins Barata. Pedro is AVP, Carbon Pricing and Decarbonization at the Environmental Defense Fund. He brings extensive experience in shaping international carbon market frameworks, including Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and advancing high-integrity approaches to carbon market design and climate finance. Next, we have Mr. Uma Maheshwaran Krishnan. Uma is an Article 6 and carbon pricing regional expert at the UNFCCC Regional Cooperation Center, supporting countries in the MENA and South Asian regions on carbon market readiness and implementation. And finally, we have Mr. Brij Mohan. Brij is a senior climate change officer at the ADB, where he works on climate finance, carbon markets, and supporting low carbon development pathways in developing countries. With that, let us begin our discussion. So for the first round of questions, for the answers, you can probably take about 3 to 5 minutes. And then we can, if we have time, we'll come back for the second round of questions. So my first question is to Mr. Pedro Barata. And sir, from your global carbon market architecture perspective, what are the most critical design choices that countries must make together to ensure their participation in Article 6 markets delivers both environmental integrity and long-term strategic value? You may like to answer.
So thank you, and thank you for having me again, this panel. And this is a fundamental question that you're putting to us. What are the critical choices that the governments must make? The most important critical choice is to, first of all, the mindset of the Paris Agreement is fundamentally different from a Kyoto Protocol mindset. So the first thing that I would suggest that countries have to do is look at, in terms of their national commitment, how are you going to finance, across all of the different financing sources, the things that you're expected to achieve with your national commitment, with your NDC. And then check for what some people have called the crediting space, i.e., what is it that within your national commitment allows you to sell credits and yet maintain that national commitment? So that is the critical factor, I would say, in designing your strategy towards the international carbon market. And I think Axel in the previous panel has mentioned, I think both of us as kind of foreigners in India were very pleasantly surprised with the early decisions on the list of categories of projects that was provided by India to the international world, because financing framework and this financing strategy with a climate change long-term strategy. So that would be, as an opening start, that would be, I think, the critical design choice facing India.
So thank you very much for that. And I think what is very important, what you have pointed out, is the alignment of your country's development objectives with that of the Paris Accord. So once that alignment is there, I think then we would look forward to a better engagement, I would think, in terms of not only the quality of credits, but also how to achieve the objectives that we have set out for ourselves. And thank you for that. So my question now is to Mr. Brij Mohan. From the perspective of development finance institutions, how can Article 6 support investment flows towards low carbon pathways in India? Additionally, what are the key enabling conditions or green signals that development finance institutions look to build for credible and scalable Article 6 project pipeline in the country level?
Hello. Thank you, ma'am, for this question. And yeah, it's already afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think if you look at the perspective of DFIs or MDBs, definitely Article 6 can play a very transformational role, especially when you are thinking of unlocking, lots of investment, which is definitely very much needed when you talk about the low carbon development in the country. First, as we all know, Article 6 introduces performance-based, or I would say result-based revenue stream. That is kind of very much, when we talk about the development institutions, it is very critical in a way that it improves your marginal projects into a kind of bankable projects. And especially when we talk about the India, as Pedro mentioned, that we already have the list out, where we can interact with the international carbon market. So if you see the list, definitely emerging and the hard to abate sector projects are very critical to basically get that benefit of the, carbon market under Article 6. Secondly, I would like to mention that we definitely also look at Article 6 as a very powerful de-risking tool. Again, for example, when you have project return improves, when you see, some extra revenue stream attached to your project, then definitely it can really transform a whole sector. I mean, you should not be looking at this as a standalone project angle, but that can really transform the whole sector. Additionally, for MDBs or DFIs, Article 6 can also kind of enable us to think about the blending finance solutions. For example, we can think about the, combining concessional resources. We can also have MDB, finance attached to it, and then carbon revenue. And those kind of blending solutions are really very critical. Let me also quickly address your second part of the questions. So MDBs definitely can play a critical role, especially, and just wanted to address there that what we look at the country level or the project level and how we assess, especially, determining where our investment should go. Especially, look at the credible and scalable pipeline under Article 6. So we normally assess a country, definitely which should have a prior experience in the carbon market sort of mechanisms, like we had CDM, we have JCM, and then other result-based financing programs are there. We also definitely assess and look at the country whether it has a well-defined, architecture, or I would say robust framework. For example, it should also define that, whether the corresponding adjustments, understandings are there, robust MRV systems are in place, or for that matter, definitely do we have technical capacity to look at the projects, to evaluate and then assess and of course approve those particular projects. And lastly, if you look at the market, and it really has to develop the market confidence, especially it should be depending on the high quality or delivering high quality or verifiable emission reductions, right? So, I mean, all those aspects or green signal, I would say we definitely do assess at the, country level or at the transaction level. And I'm happy to share, as per our assessment, I think India is kind of well prepared or well aligned, and then, it's very ready to engage with the high integrity carbon transaction. Let me stop here. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that. And my question to Uma is, as Article 6 mechanisms become operational, what are the key technical challenges countries face in executing authorization processes and corresponding adjustments?
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for the question. First of all, thank you so much for the organizers for having me here. Before I answer to this important question, which is the authorization corresponding, I would like to make a small disclaimer. This is my personal view, not from the UNFCCC Secretariat view. I'm from the Regional Collaboration Center for the MENA and South Asia. Based on my experience of working across the region, I will try to answer this question across 4 different points. One, there is a good amount of learning has to be done specific to the policy linkages or policy level linkages specific to what's happening on the sectoral level. 2, there has to be a good amount of institutional or the interministerial coordination which has to happen, because when we see that, we always see that Ministry of Environment is always in the spotlight for the corresponding adjustments for the authorization. But what happens is that when you are looking into the NDC on a holistic level, the sectoral ministries or the line ministry, they have a very important role, because they are the one who will be finally taking the conditional or the unconditional target specific to the sectoral level. So that sort of understanding is very much needed, and it's already happening in some of the countries, which we can say. On the policy level, if we have to speak, there has to be a good amount of clarity has to be worked upon how the policies along with the carbon market is directly linked with the NDC. If we have to speak about the past in the carbon world, I see a lot of veterans, a lot of my gurus are sitting here. We all started in the CDM. There, in the case of CDM, we had the opportunity, like it was only the approval from the governments, not authorization. But when we are talking about the authorization, it has to also have the linkages specific to the NDC, what it is been mentioned by the country, because in the past, we never had the opportunity to look into any of those angles. So that's another important parameter which we have to look into. The third is the concept of approval versus the authorization, kind of the misalignment with the interpretation. When we are talking about the approval or the authorization, like if you are speaking specifically about the PACM projects, it's not that when the project is receiving the approval, it's not mandatory that it is authorized. So that sort of a misalignment is already happening with the project developers between the ecosystem. So that requires a good amount of understanding of what to be authorized and what is getting approved. So that's another learning which you should have. And then the last point is that accounting, specifically towards operationalization of Article 6 and the corresponding adjustments. Where does all these corresponding adjustments or the authorized credits finally sit into the overall gamut of the Paris Agreement? So in the masterclass yesterday, we had good amount of interaction with all the colleagues, specifically on how the reporting is going to be playing an important role. So if I have to summarize, institutional arrangements, policy level linkages, and the clarity of the approval versus the authorization, and then how these finally getting considered into the accounting. That's the 4 important parameters which IFC what's happening across the region. And if I have to again summarize one thing, the key challenges is not only on the technical aspect, it is also very much related with the institutional coordination or interministerial coordination, interpretation of the rules, modalities, procedures of what is going to be authorized and what should not be authorized, and then finally taking it into the accounting, which is going to be the important parameter for the governments when they are looking into this. So I'll take a pause here. Maybe in case of any further discussion, we'll be happy to.
Thank you so much for that. I hope my ministry colleagues will be taking notes of what you have said. And I especially feel the challenge of coordination is a very major thing, because it's the Ministry of Environment finally who approves these projects. But the projects have to be implemented or approved in reality by the line ministries, which may be like MNRE or Ministry of Power. So unless you have a very good system of coordination, it's a lot of projects can go haywire in terms of priorities, I would think.
That's why I did not tell any of the sectoral name here.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that. And my question to Abhishek is, many countries at early stages of implementing Article 6 carbon markets, what are the strategic considerations for using Article 6 carbon markets for achieving national climate targets and the Paris goals?
Thank you, Namrita ma'am, and let me first thank the organizers, sir, especially Bureau of Energy Efficiency, for inviting me here. I think so far since last day and today, and hearing from other panelists, it is clear that Article 6 implementation is not an easy journey, right? So countries needs to have a strong foundation, first of all, even before they start looking at participation in Article 6. Now, we heard about some considerations, but I would like to highlight what we at UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center are trying to do. And based on our experience working with many countries now, I think we need some kind of, I would say, building blocks on which countries can start looking at considerations, start looking at processes, start looking at different linkages, not just with NDCs, but also with SDGs and Paris goals. Now, keeping that in mind, in 2024, I think 2 years back, supported by the European Commission, we started this initiative known as Integrated Assessment for Article 6. It's a 3-year project where we are working with 3 countries, Peru, Tanzania, and Sri Lanka. And we have implementing partners, including CPSU and RAND. CPSU is a Costa Rican-based organization, and RAND from the US. And then we have in-country implementation, and I see here Axel, and very happy to share that Perspectives is leading work in Peru and Tanzania. So what we are trying to do is to develop an assessment and prioritization tool, right? Because there are different processes, there are different areas which are linked to Article 6. It's not just about developing Article 6 projects. You have to see how it is linked to NDCs, how it is linked to your transparency requirements, particularly, how countries should report as part of their BTRs, because you have to provide a structure summary in your biennial transparency report. So we are developing this framework where, we identify different processes, outputs, and it's not I would say it's not a guidance or a to-do list, but it is actually a navigator, I would say, through which countries can understand what are the different processes and outputs they should look at. And I think the interesting part of this is also to have a toolbox, basically, where, we are trying to link these different processes with the existing resources. Because one of the challenges which we have seen are faced by countries is that there is a lot of research and many guidance are there, but then how countries can find these guidance. So we are kind of creating a heavy repository where based on countries' need, they can identify different resources and use them as they implement their journey of Article 6. So I think, I'll be happy to share more about our experiences from the countries, but I think the summary here is that countries need to think strategically, because it would have a huge impact on meeting their own targets if not done right. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that, Abhishek. So we have another 24 minutes left. So what we can do is have another round of questions and maybe finish that in 20 minutes and then have some audience questions. So my second round of questions to you, Pedro, first is, as countries move from readiness to implementation, how can they balance the dual objective of maximizing carbon market opportunities while ensuring that mitigation outcomes contribute to their own NDCs? And specifically, what frameworks or decision-making tools can governments use to determine which mitigation outcomes to authorize for transfer and which to retain for domestic use?
So thank you again for that question. So going back to a lot of what has been discussed already in the first round, again, the major decision, as I see it, and maybe I have a little bit of a financing slant here, but it's basically about understanding and embedding Article 6 as a financing tool into your policies. And by policies, I mean your national policies, but it really has to be seen sector by sector. So let's take a random sector, agriculture. What are the mitigation opportunities? Yes, but also what are the financing and other constraints that exist to that mitigation opportunity? and then have a very clear look at what is it that Article 6 or access to different financing tools in the carbon market will unlock in terms of those mitigation opportunities. And all of that has to be seen strategically across all of the sectors. So it really has to be a kind of a whole of government approach. That would be the first thing. This has to be embedded into a kind of an institutional whole of government approach to how you approach Article 6. The other thing is that for each of these, let's say, mitigation opportunities, map out what are the financing streams. In many cases, Article 6 by itself is not going to be the lever that drives something to successful closure. You have to do it in a context of blended finance, etc., especially thinking about the types of opportunities that are there on the list. These are high-cost, novel technologies. The expectation cannot be, unlike the CDM days, that the carbon component of it is going to finance the full incremental cost. It has to be embedded, and somebody has mentioned here, Bridge has mentioned, it has to be embedded in a blended finance construct. And so it's even more a strategic outlook that has to be done with a lot of careful thinking about where these different streams are coming from.
So thank you so much for that. And the sector-by-sector approach is very useful because that is where you recognize where the opportunities lie. And carbon credits by itself is not going to make a project sustainable. So the idea about getting in blended finance plays so important, such an important role in all the pipeline of projects which you may identify for Article 6. And coming to this takes off from what Bridge also had said. So my question to you is, do you see carbon markets becoming a material source of climate finance at scale, or will they remain complementary to concessional and blended finance?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this question. So I think I would say, I mean, at this moment, definitely, what MDBs like ADBs thinking, especially look at the Article 6 and its instrument. We are considering definitely blending carbon finance into our investments, the investments we are having at the country level at the sector, in the sectors. But I just wanted to also highlight here that MDBs they can definitely play a critical role, especially when it comes to advancing Article 6. When you talk about like from readiness to transactions to make it a scale also, right? So, I mean, we do offer kind of the full spectrum of support, especially from the upstream to midstream to downstream. So if you look at the midstream, we definitely would like to work with the governments and with the ministries, especially providing them or kind of creating enabling environments so that we can definitely build their capacity, for example, set up a institutional level frameworks, and then when we look at the midstream level, we really wanted to work closely with all the players to create a credible pipeline, or even creating a project pipelines, even starting with the pilots, right? So there, I would like to just mention that ADB has its regional level technical assistance program where we're supporting, I think, more than 15 countries. We have kind of a commitment to also support Government of India very recently, and then we would be utilizing Article 6 support facilities, especially building the pipeline project and also kind of creating enabling environments and the work program which we deliver. At the downstream level, MDBs like ADB, I mean, they also kind of provide a much needed carbon finance to the projects, which or transactions which we kind of support through the upstream to midstream level. And you might have experienced that MDB has established like carbon finance and mobilized carbon finance or become a kind of an intermediary here. So MDB, I just wanted to mention that ADB had that experience under its carbon market program. We had experience, establishing 2 carbon funds under the Kyoto Protocol regime. And then based on that learning, we have launched Article 6 carbon fund. We call it Climate Action Catalyst Fund. And through this CACF, we have intention to mobilize carbon finance, especially under the international carbon market or under that compliance. So I think for India, I would say the pathway is kind of very clear. So there's a good momentum. There's a good opportunity, and definitely, we can definitely quickly move from the readiness to the, piloting transactions, and then thinking of making it at a scale level. And MDBs and DFIs, they can bring. Even government can also think of there are so many instrument, I would say, or because like everyone mentioned that there is a risk involved even developing any carbon projects, right? So we can definitely take that early kind of a risk. I just wanted to share like one example that under the ADB carbon fund, we have that, doing the long-term and forward contracts under that carbon fund. Definitely that can really absorb early stage carbon fund. Based on ADB experience, what we have experienced that it is really very critical to integrate carbon finance at the very early stage of the project designing. It should not be the afterthought, right? When you are developing any project. So definitely all those kind of instrument like credit enhancement or the kind of a guarantee products can also be there, along with that blending mechanisms, which is there. Yeah, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that bridge. And my question to you, Uma, is that in your experience, how a country is approaching the decision of when and how to apply corresponding adjustments, particularly in the context of voluntary versus compliance markets? And what do you think are the specific technical capacities, such as registries or maybe tracking systems or MRVs, which are currently the biggest bottleneck for countries?
Thank you. Before I answer this, maybe I'll just try to give some experiences which we have done. I started the Article 6 Readiness Capacity Building Program for MENA South Asia countries. So after working with around 8 or 9 odd countries, the way which I see is that there is no standardized approach across all the countries. It's like every country when I work, like if I'm saying that working with Sri Lanka is completely different in case of comparing to working with a country like Djibouti. So here, one of the biggest learning is that what the countries are doing is that they're trying to have sector-specific analysis. Like if I have to give the context of the Sri Lanka, what it's happening is that they have a clear understanding of what they would like to authorize, what they can allow the participation in the compliance, and in the point what it's been also mentioned by Pedro, like on the positive list, they have very clearly explicitly mentioned if you are developing a renewable energy asset, you will get only 25% you will as the corresponding investment. So that means when the project developer is putting his money on the table for developing Article 6 projects, he can straight away plug in only 25% is going to be in the compliance market, the remaining 75% whether it's going to be in the domestic market or not. So that sort of a clear indication is already happening. So that's one of the learning specific to the sector-specific informations. On the point what Bridge was mentioning on the institution, so based on our experiences in terms of building the institutional arrangement for one of the Gulf country, what we have seen is that the clear understanding of authorization versus the approval is kind of getting lost between the institutions, like who will be doing what. If you're talking about the oil economies, like they say that if the oil economy, Ministry of Energy, they have a predominant role compared to the Ministry of Environment. So you need to have a well-balanced rules and modalities so that the the domestic target with regards to the carbon pricing in the oil and gas sector can be mapped, as well as when the projects coming from the other sectors, they can be authorized, and that's one of the other learning. Now another thing which is like kind of very interesting to learn is that the participation on the registries or participation on the MRVs, the countries are really looking into a localized approach in terms of how they would like to integrate all the carbon pricing instruments, how they are going to link it with the CBAM, or how they are going to link it with the tax which they have. That's another question which is like, I personally feel there is a good amount of work to be done, meaning good amount of capacity building has to be done specific to the countries, because they themselves are not clear in terms of how these independent carbon pricing instruments are going to play in a role. Finally, again, I'll go back to the point of the Article 13, which is like going to be how all these numbers will put into the respective tables of the country-related targets, which is going to be achieved. So in a way, we can say that it's like kind of a broader climate policy is kind of considered, and how Article 6 is going to be placed into this is still a learning process, as we all do. And a good amount of work has to be done, one on the capacity building, second understanding on this important question, what I can authorize and what I should not authorize. And that's the question where I'm passing the clarity to the private sector, because it's not the government who is going to do the real implementation. It will be the private sector. That's their money. It's going to be on the real emission, on the real mitigation activities. So that's the learnings which I have in terms of working with across the region. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think Article 6 is a learning experience for each country, and each country's experience is going to be slightly different because their priorities are going to be slightly different. So I think, but there is opportunity to learn from each other. And my question to Abhishek is, you mentioned that the IAA 6 approach is currently being piloted in diverse countries like Sri Lanka, Tanzania, and Peru. How does the flexible design of this framework help early stage countries such as India navigate the steep learning curve of Article 6 implementation?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And I think the way we started developing this approach and the prioritization and assessment tool, keeping in mind that we would like to share this with many countries, and but also taking experiences from 3 countries, and that's how we have chosen countries from different regions and with different background. And just to mention that, even before we started this project, we have requested for an expression of interest from countries who would like to have this kind of support. And over 24 countries have shown their interest, but we could only do it for 3 because of the time and resources we have. Now on the design and the flexibility of the approach, I would say at least we are trying to define processes and interlinkages between different areas, as I mentioned, between NDC, transparency, and Article 6, so that other countries can also see what are the processes, what are the different steps which you have to take when it comes to looking at these interlinkages. And the flexibility is also about, using it, because, as I said, it is in the pilot stage, but we are also, thinking about scaling it up so that other countries can also use it. I think there are few specific requests which came from the 3 countries. For instance, in case of Peru, they would like us to focus on some of the specific things, like how would this be useful for looking at sectoral potential of this of participation when it comes to sectoral potential, as well as when it comes to sectoral baselines. So I think one thing it gives you is to understand where the country should focus on, right? Once you do this assessment, it would help you to take certain decisions where countries then further look at some of these implementation activities, whether it is about developing a registry, whether it is about how to report your information in the BTRs. In that sense, it is flexible. But yeah, I think as we go along, as we learn more from the countries, I think we would be happy to share that with other countries as well. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you for that. I think we have 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, so we can take some audience questions. I can see somebody. Is there somebody there? Please also specify the speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jagdish Shivahare, professor and ex-scientist ISRO. This is a general question. My question, how is the national and international carbon markets strategy efficient and impactful to cope up with environmental integrity, ecological damage, and biodiversity losses?
Thank you for that question, but would any panelist want to give this, try to answer this question? Do you want to try, Petro?
I can try, but I have to say I had a little bit difficulty hearing. For those of us in the stage, there's a lot of feedback, so it's difficult. But if I understood correctly, your question was more or less, how does national and international carbon markets cope with things like biodiversity,
environmental integrity,
etc.
Ecological damage and biodiversity losses, or related to the nature.
Thank you for that. I'll be very broad in my answer, but essentially, almost all carbon crediting frameworks, so whether it's Paris Agreement, even the Clean Development Mechanism, had some consideration for what we call social and environmental safeguards, and that includes biodiversity loss and other beyond carbon, other environmental integrity issues. So that is routinely addressed in the carbon crediting frameworks. But I'll get to a point that I think is important to say. One thing is to have that embedded in your carbon crediting framework and in your rules. The other thing is to actually see it implemented and vetted at every single project level. And if there's one thing that we've learned over, by now, 20 years of carbon crediting, from the CDM days through to today, is that this market is built on credibility. And so if you don't abide by the rules of social integrity, environmental integrity, in any of your frameworks, you will, sooner or later, you will see a collapse of the market. And we've seen that, I think it was Axel, actually, I read something that you wrote a couple of years ago, where you had a beautiful three cycle. We're on to the fourth wave of credibility. We better get this right again. And just a final disclaimer here, it doesn't matter if you're the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, or if you're Vera or Gold Standard, pardon the publicity, the proof is in the pudding, put it this way. So if the PACM rules, which by now have been mostly settled and are very high in integrity, the expectation, are not actually met in implementation, we will be setting ourselves for yet another failure. So I'm really hoping, like everybody else, that this time around we get it right.
Excellent, sir. Excellent.
So we have time for one more question. I think there's one gentleman standing.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the panel for an amazing conversation. So my question is directed to Uma Maheshwaran, sir. The idea is to understand safeguards better. So I'm with EY, and during let's say, cooperative approaches, let's say JCM, so I'll be precise. So in Article 6.4, there is a thing called SD tool, which essentially maps out the environmental integrity, something that the question previously touched upon as well. But the thing is, we already have EIA for projects, I would say EIA assessment for the projects. And then in Article 6.2 SD tool, there are 3 forms which are needed to be submitted, form number 15, 16, and 17. So I just wanted to understand how safeguard is being mapped differently by them, or what was the need for it if a project already has an EIA in place. So why do we additionally require 3 additional forms for essentially understanding the environmental integrity on that level by Article 6.4?
Thank you. Thanks for the question, specifically on the sustainable development tool for the PACM. If I have to compare the EAA along with the SD tool, and then also on the safeguard mechanism, there are two things which I would like to emphasize. When we are speaking about the EAA, it will be speaking mostly on the local context, but how it is kind of going most towards the project activity and all the other aspects. But when you're talking about the SD tool, you are also going to have the SD tool implemented on a monitoring period as well. In case if there is going to be change in the SD tool over a period of time, the project has to again go for the deviation or the request for the changes as per the change which is going to happen in the project. And again, on to the point of the safeguard mechanism. In the past, CDM did not have the opportunity that where the stakeholders can comment across the lifetime of the crediting period. But under the PACM, you have the opportunity to have the safeguard measures of the community or safeguard measures of the people who are directly or indirectly associated throughout the lifetime of the crediting period. So at any given point of a time, any stakeholder, they have the possibility to provide their intervention or the comments, which will be reflected in the next monitoring report or the next verification process which is going to be done. So that's the way the PACM is kind of a bit different compared to the EAA, which is happening on the project level compared to what's happening under the carbon market linkages under the PSCM.
So great, thank you so much for that answer. And summing up, I would like to say today's discussions highlight the growing importance of host country readiness for effective participation in the Paris-aligned carbon markets. Strong governance frameworks, institutional capacity, and transparent accounting systems will be critical to ensuring that carbon markets deliver both environmental integrity as well as development benefits. As more countries operationalize the carbon pricing and Article 6 mechanisms, continued collaboration, knowledge sharing, and capacity building will play a central role in strengthening global carbon market architecture. So thank you all to all the panelists for the very engaging discussion today, and thank you to all the participants who have joined here today for very patient listening and for your questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that very enriching session today. May I now request Ms. Meenakshi to kindly join us here on the stage and felicitate all the panelists. Ms. Namita Prasad, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Mr. Pedro Barata, Associate Vice President, Environmental Defense Fund. Mr. Brij Mohan, Senior Climate Change Officer, Asian Development Bank. Mr. Uma Maheshwaran Krishnan, Article 6 and Carbon Pricing Regional Expert at UNFCCC, Regional Collaboration Center for the MENA and South Asia. Mr. Abhishek Kaushik, Senior Advisor, Climate and Carbon Markets, UNEP. Thank you. Thank you so much once again for that really thought-provoking discussion, and I think a lot of interesting key takeaways for everybody present here today. Can I request you all to please rise up from your seats and pose for a group photograph? Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, in the paucity of time, we couldn't take many questions, but just in case if you have any further questions, perhaps you can take it offline with our panelists. And can we please give a big round of applause for them one more time? Thank you. Thank you so much once again. With that, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, right before lunch, we will proceed towards another plenary session for the day. This plenary session is going to be on From Innovation to Integrity, Evolving Carbon Market Methodologies. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will define the overarching objectives and challenges of advancing carbon markets amid rapidly evolving climate solutions, and of course it begins by outlining the need for clear, credible and widely applicable methodologies that can keep pace with emerging technologies. This discussion surveys key areas of innovation, carbon dioxide removal, that is CDR, and carbon capture and utilization, storage, and biomethanization, using them as examples to illustrate broader methodological gaps and opportunities. Rather than diving into the technical specific, this conversation will focus on shared goals, improving measurement, verification, ensuring market integrity, enabling scalability, and aligning incentives for buyers and developers. This session will aim to identify priority actions for strengthening trust and coherence across next-generation carbon markets. All of you are requested to kindly remain at your seats because we just have another 30 minutes to go for the next panel. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very illustrious panel for the next discussion. All of you are requested to kindly remain there at your seats, and don't worry, we will get ample opportunities to network like this with each other. I hope by now we have already started posting online and made our presence on social media by posting about the great sessions that have been happening since yesterday. And I believe you might be using the hashtag #Prakriti 2026, because if not, please start doing it from right away. You can also see your post outside at our social media wall, which would be highlighting some really innovative posts. And as I mentioned earlier, you never know. The most creative and innovative post at the end of the day might end up getting something exciting from here. So let's hope for the best. All right, so looks like that we're all set for this panel, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly join me in welcoming on stage our chair and moderator, Mr. Asitava Sen, co-founder and CEO, Carbon Removal India Alliance. Welcome to you, sir. I think we can have a big round of applause, like maybe more louder than that. Welcome to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an illustrious set of panelists for this discussion. Please join me in welcoming with a big round of applause, Mr. Jay Asundi, Executive Director, Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy. Mr. Abhinav Jindal, Senior Faculty, Power Management Institute. Mr. Mohammad Imtiaz Khan, Executive Director, PwC India. Dr. Nidhi Sahu, DGM, Indian Federation of Green Energy. I think I'm not hearing the applauses properly. Maybe we can keep it going a little louder. Ms. Abhilasha Jha, Member, Indian Federation of Green Energy. Mr. Vidyut Mohan, CEO and Founder, Takachar. Mr. Samrat Sen Gupta, Technical Director, ProClimb. Wow. So we have about 7 panelists for this discussion, but only 30 minutes to conduct this discussion, because after that we also have Shri Gaur Gopal Das ji's session, which will start at 2 o'clock. So,
yeah, first of all, there was a lot of echo when you were speaking. I hope now it is okay. Can you hear everybody? Okay, good. Okay, no problem. So let's start right away. I think we have been waiting for quite some time, and we'll try to do as much justice as we can do of whatever available time. And I promise, the moment I feel hungry, with everybody's permission, I will close the panel, okay? So it's a Sunday, and in a way, it's a good time to have a relaxed conversation, I believe. Our MC has already introduced the purpose of the session. So we are going to talk about a few new methodologies which has high potential, but not yet there fully in terms of integration with CCTS and other compliance market tools like CDR, carbon removal, CCUS, and biomethanol and other things. So let me first introduce everybody in this panel in the order they're sitting. I'll just take the names and the organizations to show that we have a very diverse panel here with 2 project developers, 2 industry bodies, 3 industry bodies including CRIA. We have a think tank, CSTEP, We also have Abhinav from NTPC and Power Management Institute. Very diverse panel. So, first of all, on my left, we have Jay Asundi, Executive Director, C-STEP. We have Abhinav, Dr. Abhinav Jindal, who's Senior Faculty, Power Management Institute, and of course, also NTPC. Muhammad Imtiaz Khan, PwC. Nidhi from IFGE, which is Indian Federation of Green Energy. Abhilasha from some other organization which is misspelled here, Indian Federation of Green Energy. You can introduce yourself, sorry, Abhilasha. Vidyut Mohan, Takachar, and Samrat from ProClimb. I will, since we are short of time, I'll try to give a broad overview and then, call upon one of, each one of them one by one. And obviously we have to stick to as little time as possible so that we finish and give everybody a chance to speak. So first of all, CREA, Carbon Removal India Alliance, is a unique organization in the sense that it is the only industry-led ecosystem player for durable carbon removal in India. And I emphasize this word, durable carbon removal, because the focus for CREA is more on engineered CDR like biochar, enhanced rock weathering, direct air capture, bioenergy capture storage, and marine CDR, and not so much on the nature-based side. And we have now 25 members, so it's definitely the only and obviously the most representative organization as far as CDR industry is concerned on policy tables and other stakeholder platforms like this. We all know that at a country level, industry level, company level, if you look at the main purpose, which is to manage emission of greenhouse gases, out of which CO2 is the biggest one, there is a carbon cycle. I think everybody starts first with avoidance and reduction, which is broadly we can call decarbonization, because that's internal to any company. First, they will try to convert their fossil fuel to renewable energy and do other process engineering and improvement to reduce and avoid emission as much as possible, because this is also typically is a cost positive way of reducing emission. But Niti Ayog's net zero papers, which were launched last month, talks about a 23% residual emission. So whatever you might do, the best in class, the gold standard of decarbonization, it is not possible to abate each and every kg and ton of CO2 emission. There will be residual emission. And so once you exhaust your decarbonization option, you come to residual emission, and that's where CDR, CCUS, and some of the other green hydrogen comes, as I understand. And therefore, it's important to look at decarbonization and managing legacy and residual emission to the best possible way. And within that, there are differences. CCUS and CDR are different things. CCUS talks about point source capture, and CDR talks about atmospheric carbon dioxide removal. And it is important to understand that the purpose is very different, and CDR is the only solution which is net negative, because it is actually reducing what is already there in the atmosphere. And the potential is huge, at least in CDR, which is the sector I know most, and other people are going to talk about other sectors, which is not my core area. In our own estimate, biochar rock weathering alone can remove 0.9 gigaton per year at a very optimistic level, which is a significant part of emission, which results into a $90 billion industry if you take a $100 per ton carbon credit price, and removal credit price is a high price, and it's a premium product, which is why it is restricted to primarily VCM at this point of time, and that to global buyers like Microsoft and Google, and so on and so forth. And it is important to integrate CDR with compliance market, which is why we are here, both domestic and international, because while VCM is a good sandbox to test out methodologies and other things, scaling is going to happen only through compliance markets. And we already have good examples like Japan's GXETS, which has CDR very well inbuilt. We have the carbon removal certification framework of EU CRCF. So these are already in place, and one has to see how well we can integrate some of these methodologies in the main discussion. So there was a paper launched by CEW and CREA 2 days ago called "How Can Carbon Markets Scale CDR?" And one of the two things, main recommendation was one was to have compliance market play its role. Secondly, have clear taxonomies. I think that's the starting point. We have a lot of confusion between what is CDR, what is CCUS, what is other methodologies. So unless we have clear methodology, taxonomy, we will not be able to distinguish one with the other. Each one of them have very different cost economics, and therefore approach needs to be very unique. CRIA has been engaged with the CCTS Offset Technical Committee. We were part of the 4th Technical Committee meeting, and two main recommendations that were placed, and this is for you to debate further on, is one, harmonization with VCM standards and compliance market standards. Many of the VCM standards, Puro, Isometric, Carbon Standard International, I'm again talking about from a CDR perspective, are ICVCM approved. Buyers like Microsoft, Google, they are not fools. They know how to do due diligence. So there is an integrity built in. If I re-engineer and do my methodologies in India very different, that will create more confusion and chaos and difficulty for operators to play in, particularly international market, both voluntary and compliance. So we strongly advocate harmonization of standards, globally existing standards, and keep on expanding the portfolio. Biochar is already part of offset market, but enhanced rock weathering and other methodology should be there. And in that context, the expansion of the National Determined Authority, NDA, from 10 to 21 members was a good step, I would say, directionally. And there are a lot of opportunities for integration of some of these pathways. For example, recently, biomethanol guidelines were issued, and they're talking about direct air capture and other biogenic sources of CO2 and industrial emission as a source for biomethanization. So this leads us to an important opportunity of integrated carbon hubs, where DAC can capture the carbon, CCUS can capture the carbon, and then it is utilized in biomethanol and other such pathways. So with that, I quickly turn to my panelists. So first, Jay, you are coming from CSTEP, which is think tank and policy research organization, as I understand. And from that point of view, you're already working with, I believe, the market players and regulators on developing best-in-class standards. So you can introduce yourself quickly in one line, but then talk about, from an organization like yours, research institution, how you can help develop integrity and credibility in the methodologies so that long-term viability is more assured. Because the whole carbon market, I would say the real heart of carbon market lies in integrity and trust. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you, Asitava, and thank you for the organizers for inviting us. CSTEP is a not-for-profit research organization, and we've been working on issues around climate change, mitigation, and even the pathways towards net zero for a while now. And it's almost 5 years ago that we came to realize that we will not be able to achieve any of the net zero goals unless you have CDR or CCUS as the option going forward. So given that, I think the important thing to consider is this idea of how are we making sure that new technologies are used. Now, why is it relevant for India more than others is because we are still a growing country. We will need to still manufacture steel, manufacture cement, and the process emissions will generate CO2 from that. We cannot say we have to get rid of that. So how do we do that? Through CDR, CCUS? And then the more important part, and this is where we come as a think tank, is look at how new technologies can be used to sense as well as add robustness to the measures in the way we measure the emissions. So this is where we have to start thinking about not just geographic information systems, but also sensing technologies through satellite, which will help come up with robust measures in the way we can measure things, monitor things. So the first part would be to come up with a baseline, then have a mechanism by which we would have continuous measurement or even monitoring for that purpose. And this is all alternate to that manual data collection and the simple models that are currently being used. We have to leverage ISRO's capability from satellites to look at the ways in which we can measure. And the reason I talk about geographic information systems, because we have to start looking at ways in which we can combine different technologies which have different resolutions and see how that can be combined together. And that's where the role of a think tank can be played. We don't have any biases from the perspective of industry, but we are more interested in looking at aggregate ways in which carbon dioxide can be reduced, our emissions can be reduced, and we move towards a net zero. So this is where we also have to start thinking. You did mention towards the last part of your speech of looking at direct air capture, but what about nature-based solutions? What do you look at some of those aspects, and how do we include some of those mechanisms or means so that it can be part of this market? And that's where objective or better methods would need to be developed so that we can use that. So in some ways, I will say GIS and sensing tech for CDR, CCUS will be needed. You have to think about baseline, the monitoring, and then finally, we also have to come up with the verification, either digital, auditable, as well as something that's scalable. It's not something that we say, oh, we can do it in a lab, but we cannot do it for real. And this is where we really have to think about ways and means of using this technology to combine all the information sources and so that they can be cross-verified and come to that. I think I'll just leave with, there's a whole host of technologies. I think people talk about carbon mapper, GHG-SAT, Copernicus, CO2M. I think there are various new technologies. I think there was a methane SAT that went up recently. So these are ways and means that we have to use these technologies so that we can produce scalable solutions for MRV. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Very interesting how to use modern technologies like satellite and GSI for GIS for improving the process. So Abhinav Jindal, if I come to you, Abhinav, you are in the power sector and with Power Management Institute. So just say a line about Power Management Institute, but more importantly, the question to you is more from a policy perspective. How do you see the power sector and in general industry working to make, let's say, things like CCUS and other processes more robust, and also how it benefits industry in, let's say, integration in some of their processes, because otherwise it will always be an obligation. How to turn it around and make it an opportunity for industry to play in this.
Thank you. Thank you to BEE for also having me. So as you pointed out, I come from industry. I represent NTPC and I'm right now part of Power Management Institute. It's a capacity building institution where we train young engineers and develop leaders for the power sector. And these professionals have gone on to serve not just NTPC but across different PSUs and different sectors in India. So my view will not only represent industry but will be a quasi-academic view. So as you are aware, power sector drives our economies, right, globally. And power sector is also in the midst of an unprecedented global energy transition, right? On the one hand, in India, we are trying to see how we can scale this growth going forward. We have our Viksit Bharat goals 2047. On the other, we are also trying to balance the same with our net zero goals. And what we are also trying to do is, in this nascent carbon market which is coming up, to include more sectors going forward. We have right now 9 sectors and we have their emission intensity targets. At some point in time, we will also have our power sector, and which contributes roughly 35–40% of our national emissions. The moot point here is for our market to develop a price which is suggestive of the internal carbon price for the sector, right? And which is not external to the sector. We will also have to be mindful of the fact that as much as I think 80–90% of our economy is driven by MSMEs, and any price which is higher than what is normative is going to impact them significantly negatively. Not to talk about the carbon border adjustment mechanism that is already on our, I think, a big Achilles heel going forward for different hard-to-abate sectors of our economy. So I think as this carbon market unfolds, we probably have to work around a carbon price which is largely indigenous, which also is mindful of the integrity of the market, right? And as we were discussing just before this session, we also have to see how this market becomes interoperable as we develop on our PAT platform. So we also have to keep these considerations going forward. But I think the moot consideration is saving our key players in India, saving our key sectors in India, let them thrive, and also to use the kind of framework we had already for our existing market institutions like PAT and RECs to develop it for this nascent market going forward. I'll stop for now. We'll come back to you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Good perspective from an internal carbon cost point of view and also from an integration and harmonization of international market point of view. I'll switch to Vidyut Mohan from Takachar. Vidyut, you can introduce yourself, but since you are a decentralized biochar technology player, it would be interesting to know how you manage this integrity issue in a decentralized open system, which has its own challenges vis-a-vis DAC and others, which are far easier, I believe. And also touch upon a little bit on the co-benefits, because things like biochar and rock weather is not just removal, but it's also doing improvement on soil, agriculture, air pollution, and various other areas of livelihood, which are far more pertinent perhaps than carbon removal. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today. So from a biochar perspective, till now there have been mainly two kinds of methods of producing biochar. One is, of course, you have these really large kind of like industrial centralized facilities which are great to handle biomass that are generated in an aggregated fashion, have all the sensors and technical inputs on it to do a lot of the MRV pertaining to carbon credits. But then there are limits to this as well in terms of where you can deploy them with distributed biomass. And also, I guess the capex is a significant barrier as well. On the highly decentralized front, you have these artisanal methods of biochar production, which are again great ways to start a biochar project, but difficult to scale and difficult to also manage in terms of the emissions associated with it. So what we see the need on the ground is for more advanced, decentralized, and portable methods of biochar production. Now, with that comes a lot of co-benefit. I mean, we've seen through our work in Takachar, where we're trying to create this architecture for decentralized technology and MRV systems. We see a lot of co-benefit, like directly people from the village own and operate the equipment. There's direct employment created. The biochar is directly embedded within the community. The biomass is locally sourced from the community. So there is a lot of course, socioeconomic benefit from there. The soil benefits from biochar are also clearly becoming more and more evident as we do more and more projects. But then this brings a lot of challenge to MRV and kind of the core that we're discussing right now. So if you have to build trust in MRV, right, I mean, some of the issues that we faced on the ground were, I mean, we have a host of sensors deployed in our equipment to measure a lot of things, but there are really practical challenges that come up on the ground, like, for example, putting other things as weights on weighing scales or standing on the weighing scales that distorts the weight of the biomass that is going into the equipment. It involves as simple as, say, measuring the biomass moisture content, which is a crucial factor in MRV for biochar. And you have to do basic average of the moisture contents that you've measured. So a lot of that mistakes happen when you leave that as a manual process. Things like, how do you measure the emissions from the flue stack when you have deployed the equipment in a decentralized fashion? Because flue stack measurement is not a trivial matter. And when you have a centralized piece of machinery, you can set up 15, 20 lakhs worth of equipment to measure methane emissions from the flue stack. But when you have deployed your equipment in the middle of a forest and something breaks down, how do you repair all those sensors? So I think MRV, there's a lot of scope for technical innovation in MRV for decentralized innovations that allow semi or unskilled people to operate the equipment at the village level, which is how biochar can scale. Otherwise, it will be limited to industrial centers where technically trained staff or engineers will need to operate the equipment. So I really see a lot of scope for innovation there. On the carbon markets, on the registry side, I see a lot of scope for registering reducing the number of time needed to certify project. It takes a year to certify project, and that affects the cash flows for a lot of these small producers. And also need to cluster a lot of these projects together under one certification to speed up the access to carbon credits for these people. I'll stop here for now in interest of time.
Thank you, Vidyut. A lot of insights, good insights from a developer's point of view. Now, also it's good to have a good gender inclusivity in this panel. I don't know whether it's by design or by default, but I'll come to Abhilasha now from Bharat Bioenergy Association. Again, the same extension of the same question, in this case, bioenergy and waste-to-energy projects, decentralized projects. So how does, let's say, manage MRV and use technology and innovation to improve upon the MRV, Abhilasha?
So thank you, Asitava. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. So I'm Abhilasha Jha. I represent Bharat Bioenergy Association. We are also not-for-profit Section 8 company. And very much honored and thankful to IFG and BE for giving me this platform to be here and be the instrumental in this carbon market discussion to the Prakriti session. So thank you all. Bharat Bioenergy Association came in the picture in 2024. However, we started full functioning in 2025 and started our, work with participation in the EU-India TDC call. That was from biomass to, waste to green hydrogen research project promoted by MNRE. So to make the pace, we are working at the intersection of bioenergy, rural ecosystem, and then the now carbon market. So we are developing this complete ecosystem and being, facilitator or, giving our adding value to the complete circular economy, okay? So we are making our part with the skill development and other policy discussions. We are consulting states government as well. Then on and off participation in the research work to promote this sector. So coming to the question, and as Vidyut mentioned, I will just, carry on all the parts. Like it's a biomass to energy sector is very much decentralized and cluster-based, like wherever there are CBG plants or nowadays biomass to green hydrogen plants are there. So aggregation in that part very much is scattered. And if you look at the small projects like small unit household biogas plants are there. So we need to first of all, think of a framework where we can aggregate these all, plants basically to promote the credit system and then come up with the innovative ways. And beside the innovative, whatever regarding the sensors and everything has been discussed, they are more focused towards that. My take is how to get into the implementation part. And that too at a scalable, how we can do it at a scalable basis so that this credit will be utilized by all other, our farmers should have the benefit of it at the forefront. Next, we should come up with a framework which is more transparent and easy to implement. Transparent in a sense easy to understand as well, how we can make it very much feasible and implementation should be easy. And in interest of time, it should not take much time. The global scenario is changing every day. You have wars going on, power centrals are changing. So we need to come up in the pace, how we can immediately implement this, how we can shorten the time frame what it takes to create get the credit and everything with the MRV system, make it more robust and digital for the transparency, of course. Next, I would like to mention, especially I'm from the bioenergy sector, so I would like to stress on this part as well, that this can be a game changer and India can lead this sector, making this decentralized framework very much robust, and we should think of some ideal scenarios how we can add value to the Indian economy. I mean, I was reading somewhere like India has got 300 million, credit generated at carbon credit right now. So, I mean, there is a huge opportunity. And in terms of biomass, if you say 120 million tons is the surplus biomass going on. So how to tap those energy sectors, making, adding value to the Viksit Bharat and net zero goal of India. So this is on my end. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhilasha. Moving on to Samrat from ProClimb. We heard from two decentralized model, whereas yours is more centralized industrial biochar. So from that perspective, what's your view on improving the methodology and integrity of the whole market and make it more commercially viable and scalable?
Good afternoon. Thank you, the organizer, for having us here. And thank you, Mr. Shane, for the question. I represent ProClimb. We are primarily into projects and investment arena of biochar, taking specific to the question. And we work mainly on industrial biochar side. And as my colleague Vidut has already talked about the decentralized biochar system, I will not touch to it considering the paucity of time. I just want to highlight 3-4 major aspects on industrial biochar aspects. Though the methodology side on the registry, the system is quite robust, and we can say the present system under various registry like Puro, Isometric, the Rainbow, they are almost, we can say, the gold standard of the system is getting developed. Gold standard is adjective here, not the noun, and so don't consider that into. But still, I think there is a scope of improvement when we are getting into industrial biochar methodologies. The first I want to highlight that the present system is dealing with a binary understanding of permanence. So it is a 0 or 1 concept, but that may be more segregated in a graded permanence addressed with a discounting factor inbuilt for the credit to be generated. So that at different climatic condition, different industrial situation and different aspects, the project developer can take up the system which may be on low in their grade of permanence but still be addressed at a discounted credit per aspects. The other point that we are primarily dealing with CO2 capture in the form of biochar, but the other climate benefit in terms of the other gases, maybe methane, maybe nitrous oxide, is getting neglected. To have a better incentivization for the project developer who wants to address all those, though minor, but important gas emission absorption, should be taken up into the methodology, present methodology development. Also the feedstock additionality and material use conflict, that is presently not so robustly addressed. It may be built into the system which cater to the need to understand that the feedstock is not getting diverted from other usage. Though primarily it is understood the agri-waste or the forest waste is primarily lying abundant or getting burned, but there are a lot of other local usage which are not getting reflected, may be taken up on this factor. And these are the primarily global issues or international issues on the methodology. On the Indian perspective, I think we as a project developer or investor should also take up the responsibility of getting into the integrity. That we should not, with the learnings from the earlier part of the carbon market, particularly the faith of the cook stoves and everything, we should learn and take up which are long-term and future stand still on integrity issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Samrat, very much. So moving on quickly again, because we are short of time. Imtiaz from PwC. Question to you would be, what kind of technological innovation and digitization of methodologies can help this process to be more, what should I say, on an autopilot mode, and also how can it reduce cost without compromising on integrity? It'd be good to know, because that's what all developers said. It's a challenge to get the certification done. It takes time. It takes a big cost. So if this piece of the puzzle can be addressed, it's better for everybody.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And we understand that it's us that we are standing between you and your lunch, but we'll try to keep it very simple. And I think I'm Imtiaz from PwC. Other than other social and these kind of initiatives, we are also working very closely with BE in setting up the ICM and the registry. Coming from the point, I think we all have discussed, I think so digitization is no more optional. I think it's structural, and we can't shy away from that. The reason behind it is because, we are moving out of those paper-based or document-heavy processes into a more autopilot mode, as Mr. Asitav just pointed out. So we can't do this without the intervention of technology. It will be at all levels. Do we need a holistic change? Do we need to take a look on the holistic architecture? I think yes. We just can't digitize parts of it and portions of it. We need to look at the entire gamut of things. Now, if I just take one example of the methodology, how we are doing it today, I think we can talk about the Kyoto, we can talk about the Paris Agreement, but we are probably stuck a little lot to the static PDFs. We need to move out of those PDFs, and we need to automate those processes. Something that the machines understand. I think the methodologies need now to be machine readable, they need to be executable, and they need to be more value driven. I think that's where the essence of the drift from the shift reduces actually the interpretation drift, the human intervention and stuff. I think if you look at the Article 6 as well, there are pivotal four to five pillars, and one of them is the registry. Congratulations to BE on what they're doing with the registry. I think that's the first step. Around it, there are a lot of things that also needs to take on technology intervention. If you just look at the projects, if you look at the on-site data collection, I think there's a lot of sensors, meters, and IoTs will come into picture. You need to bring or create the backbone on which the entire system will stand. I think that's where your blockchain would come into picture. And all your rules probably would run on smart contracts and stuff. So I think I see a lot of technology intervention. And to the point that I think Vidyut mentioned on the cost, I think we also need to take a cognitive step on how we want to optimize when we scale. We cannot scale without technology, but when we scale, are we still being inclusive? Because we look at the larger players and then we look at the farmers. So do we create a more inclusive environment? Thanks so much. I know we are overshooting the time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Imtiaz. It's a challenge to catch up with the time, really. So Nidhi, last but not least, from IFGE, you have the famous last words. So in the context of biomethanol and other bioenergy technologies, how do you see this methodology development improving?
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you, B, for giving this platform to speak. And I'm Dr. Nidhi from Indian Federation of Green Energy. And we represent the industrial body. We are working on policy advocacy for renewable energy sector. So if we see the renewable energy sectors, so despite the government support, there are various schemes. So still there is a viability gaps are there in the bioenergy industry. So carbon credit system is one of the most important revenue system for the bioenergy sector. And talking about the point question, so we need to more give preference for the standardization of baseline because if you see the anaerobic digestion, if you are talking about the bioenergy sector, so anaerobic digestion, through the anaerobic digestion or other bacterial or microbial activity, we only can generate the methane or some other valuable component, energy driving component. So the process is microbial driven, so the variation in composition of raw material, and there are also seasonal variation. So we need to see the standardization of baseline plus the offset offtake. Like in CBG sector, there are the manure which enhance the carbon in the soil health. So we should also look count into for the carbon credit for counting this storing carbon in the soil. Also, and the LFOM generated through the industry is also sometimes recirculated. So there are so many combination we have to look for the standardization of methodologies for bioenergy sector, and for accurately and monitoring the data, and there should be a transparency of data also. So we need a online monitoring system, SCADA or IoT. Like these system may be helpful for the creating the system robust and formalizing the standardized baseline for the industry and for carbon credit system. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nidhi. We have managed to compress it to the extent possible. Thank you, everybody, for your valuable insights. Over to you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the evolving carbon market methodologies with us. And we apologize for rushing this panel only within the time limit of 35 minutes. And we know that we have more than like 7 people who are here sharing their perspectives with us. But in order to get going with our further sessions of the day, but thank you so much for that very enlightening session. Just in case if anyone has any questions, we can take it offline. We are any which way going to break for lunch now. May I now request Ms. Gunjan Jain from Pledge for Earth to kindly join us here on the stage and felicitate all the panelists. Our chair and moderator, Mr. Asitava Sen. Mr. Jay Asundi. Mr. Abhinav Jindal. Ladies and gentlemen, please keep it rolling. Mr. Muhammad Imtiaz Khan. Dr. Nidhi Sahu. Ms. Abhilasha Jha. Mr. Vidyut Mohan. And Mr. Samrat Sen Gupta. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists once again. Can I request you all to please rise up from your seats and kindly pose for a group photograph. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we all are going to break for lunch now. It's 1:30. Maybe next 25 minutes at about 1:55, we all will come back to the same ballroom. Sharp at 2 o'clock, we will be resuming with the next session that is going to be by Shri Gaur Gopal Das Ji. So make sure we are here back on time. Lunch is being served on 2 floors. That is on 5th floor and the same floor which we are on right now, which is 6th floor. So it's on 2 floors. You can have lunch wherever you want. Make sure we are here back on time. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll see you at 1:55.